Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and the conversation around Xbox's multi-platform strategy continues to make waves across the community. You know, are they crazy? Or is Microsoft truly paving the path for an evolution for the game industry? Well, apparently, at least one notable CEO believes that Sony will follow suit and abandon PlayStation exclusivity as well. So stick around and we'll talk about that, and also a major PlayStation IP that's allegedly in development as we speak. First, though, I do want to go ahead and thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for your support. It truly does mean the world to me, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's just go and get right into things, though, starting off with Baldur's Gate 3 and yet another major patch. Despite the fact that they've shifted their main priorities over to their next game, that doesn't exactly stop them from making Baldur's Gate 3 even better. I mean, truly, Larian Studios has really proven themselves to be a consumer-first studio, which is just all the more reason to be excited for what they make next. I can't wait to see it. Honestly, other studios need to take note here, but nonetheless, they just announced that local split screen for Baldur's Gate 3 has finally made its way over to the Xbox Series S version. Now, this was actually a very controversial topic back in 2023 when the Xbox version was initially delayed. Larian infamously acknowledged their struggle with local split screen for the Series S. But ultimately, Xbox worked with Larian Studios, and they ended up getting it shipped out months later with a caveat that the Series S version would be without local split screen. And honestly, I mean, Larian could have just simply left it at that. They didn't have to do anything else, but here we are today, and clearly they weren't satisfied by that result. So they hunkered down, and evidently it took them a while, but hey, it's better late than never. So if you have a Series S, the good news here is that as a part of Patch 8, Xbox Series S local co-op will be included, and it's live right now through its stress test. My hat's off to Larian Studios. Now, for you Sims fans out there, it sounds like EA has some incredibly exciting plans inbound, and apparently imminently at that. So what's happening here is that EA has seemingly been teasing a possible re-release for Sims 1 and Sims 2. There's been a lot of speculation and rumors about this these past few days, but now it pretty much seems all but confirmed. You can see here posted up on Sims Community, they said official images, features, and release date for The Sims 1 and The Sims 2 re-releases have leaked. It's 100% real. As we reported yesterday, EA is planning to do a re-release for The Sims 1 and The Sims 2 for PC. This release has been rumored to be set for this week, and now we have an official release date too, with new promotional renders, official features, and supported platforms for the new re-releases. Now, it's claimed to be a PC release for January 31st. So, I mean, you know, this is actually true, which it appears to be. I mean, we should get an official announcement really at any moment now. For all I know, it could actually be announced before this very video even goes live. So, in that case, big congrats to you longtime Sims fans out there. Now, speaking of longtime fans, as many of you may know, I have a strong affinity with the Gears of War franchise, one of my all-time favorites, definitely a top 3 for me. So this was a bit of a throwback when I first read this piece of news. People Can Fly just announced that they're co-developing Gears of War E-Day with the Coalition. Now, this is actually a very similar announcement to the Perfect Dark collaboration between Crystal Dynamics and the Initiative announcement. Just this time, for whatever reason, there's not nearly as much controversy online. I want to point that out because, as I've been saying all along, co-development should have never been controversial in the first place, considering it's a fairly normal thing to do for modern AAA games. I digress, though. What I'll say here is that People Can Fly is probably a good choice in the sense that they have experience with Gears of War style of combat. They, of course, developed Gears Judgment way back in the day, and even their recently released Outriders has a very Gears-like feel to it. So, I mean, if the Coalition needs some help, then I think People Can Fly fits that role better than pretty much any other studio. Now, at the same time, even though I think this is a good fit, I hope they learn from their mistakes that they made in Gears Judgment. In my opinion, Gears Judgment is by far the worst entry in the franchise, and that's mostly because its combat was just so drastically different from the other games, and The unique combat that Gears of War offers is what makes this series so special in the first place. I mean, to this day, I still 100% believe that the best third-person shooting franchise is Gears of War. So hopefully they understand that now, and hopefully them and Coalition can make another special entry that takes us back to the dark atmosphere that the original trilogy offered, especially for that first game. Okay, so let's go talk about PlayStation and this idea that they could follow in the footsteps of Xbox and move away from exclusivity. Now, I'll give you my own opinion about this here in a moment, because I don't know if I necessarily agree with this entirely, but I thought there was some interesting points raised here. So I thought we could at least talk about it and have a dialogue back and forth about this in the comments. What's happening here, though, is that according to the Ori creator, Thomas Mahler, he believes that Sony will more than likely move away from their exclusive strategy in the future. He said this over on Twitter. In my emails to Phil Spencer over the years, I always brought up how crazy it would have been if you could have only watched certain DVDs on Sony players, while for others, you would have needed a Samsung player, etc. I think we can all agree that this would have been nutty for films, so why are games any different? And that's where I think that this is actually a really interesting perspective, because he is kind of correct in that aspect. Continue on here, though. He said Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 basically contains the same hardware nowadays, so porting from one platform to another isn't that big of a deal anymore. Their controllers are mostly the same. The Steam boxes will be the same. Not supporting all of these devices makes no sense, since you just cut out a huge chunk of your potential audience. Consoles have been stuck attracting the same 100 to 150 million players for over 2 decades now. If you want to see the industry grow, it needs to be easier for everyone to access the content. Right now, the price of entry is still too high, with people needing to buy a $500 box just to get their game on. You'd ultimately want everyone with a screen and a controller to be able to play all games in order to finally break through that barrier and make games available to everyone. I'd be surprised if Sony won't end up with the same strategy. People should buy the device that they like the most, but they should then have access to all the content. And yes, Nintendo will keep doing their own thing, because Nintendo is Nintendo, and that's okay. Now, this is something that Phil Spencer seemingly referred to in his interview a few days ago, where he more or less clarified Xbox's multi-platform plans. He mentioned that Microsoft views this plan as them evolving the game industry, because it makes it easier for publishers and developers that are dealing with problems like the rising cost of game development as one such example. Now, I mean, I'd argue that some of that cost comes down to just bad management and out-of-control budgets, but nonetheless, ultimately it seems like Xbox is kind of going the way of Valve. They're going to open up their platform, and Thomas Mahler seems to believe that Sony will eventually do the same thing. Now, personally, I think the main argument against this idea is that the way modern consoles are made isn't quite the same way as DVDs, Blu-ray players, and things like that. And that's because modern console manufacturers aren't just simply trying to sell games. What these console manufacturers are trying to do is they want consumers on their consoles to also sell their subscriptions. That's a big money source for Microsoft and for Sony. And I think that will be one of the more interesting aspects about the next Xbox console. Can Xbox get their console user base to reinvest into their next console and Xbox Game Pass, all while putting their games onto other platforms? Because I think for right now, their user base is locked in with the Xbox Series X. That part still remains to be seen. But if they were to succeed, is there a chance that Sony could look at that and think about a similar strategy as well? I think that's where I could say that they could possibly get to a similar destination, but I'd also kind of say on very different timelines. In my own opinion, and that's all this is, it's just my opinion, but what I expect from Sony, or at least for the short term, is that they will continue to do more of the same, but to accelerate their PC output even more. I mean, last year they had a ton of success with Helldivers 2 specifically on PC. So from a business perspective, they're already seeing the potential of day one PC releases. This is something that Microsoft has been doing for a while, and I think at the bare minimum, I think Sony's probably considering more live service day one PC games. Now, as for their single-player games, I'm not really expecting a day one release from them anytime soon, but the window in which they're staggering these games are getting shorter and shorter. We have seen that. So I wouldn't be all that surprised if that window continues to get shorter over the next 5 years. And that's also because I think there's signs out there that Sony might widen their ecosystem over to PC. I mean, at some point, they very well could launch their own PC launcher, their own storefront on the PC, or just their own subscriptions on PC. I think for the short term, that's more of where Xbox and PlayStation are on a collision course. I mean, it's obvious that the PC market is huge, and it's still growing. So I think PlayStation will continue to put more emphasis on the PC market, much like we've seen from Xbox since, 2017 or something like that? I mean, it's been a while. So I think in that vein, they are following in Xbox's lead. But I'm also not expecting Sony to release their games on a Nintendo console anytime soon, like we're seeing with Xbox. Now, 10 years from now, maybe that might change. A lot could change between now and then. But let me know what you all think about all this. Do you agree with Thomas Mahler in this situation? Do you think Sony will eventually go the way that Xbox is going or not? Now, one last thing before we go. We are starting to hear rumors that the next God of War game could be heading over to Egypt. Now, I mean, if you finished God of War Ragnarok, this probably shouldn't be a major surprise, but you can read this tweet here. This was posted up by Visceral, and he said, according to my friend, Daniel RPK, God of War is heading to Egypt. Sony is casting Middle Eastern actors for an unknown AAA game, which is likely to be the next God of War that explores Egyptian mythology. Again, if this actually turns out to be true, I don't necessarily think that this will come as a big shock per se, but ultimately I do like this idea. I mean, the Egyptian era would offer something drastically different for the God of War series than what we've seen these past few games. And there could be some really cool characters. I mean, Anubis comes to mind right away. There's Osiris and Ra, and yeah, this could actually be a really cool setup. My only thing about this, though, is that I still wonder how they're going to deal with Kratos and Atreus' storylines. There's still some loose ends with how everything unfolded in Ragnarok, which makes me believe that Atreus will play a major role in the next game. There for a long time, I was speculating that maybe he would just get his own spinoff, but I don't know. I just kind of hope that Kratos will remain the priority in the next mainline God of War game. That's all I'm trying to say here. But, I mean, I guess that's something that we'll have to wait and see, and yeah, the wait might be a long time, unfortunately. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though, where I asked you all, would you prefer Ori 3 or Banjo-Kazooie 3 by Moon Studios? Thomas Mahler has publicly been open to the idea for both of these games down the road, albeit their main priority remains with No Rest for the Wicked for the foreseeable future. Even still, though, I wanted your all's opinion because both of these franchises are just so dear to my heart. But as you can see, the majority of you likes the idea of Banjo-Kazooie 3. I mean, if this were to actually happen, what I'll say is that this is one studio that I actually do trust. I think they could actually pull it off, and I'll just simply leave it at that. So suffice to say, I'd be thrilled if Moon Studios were to work on a Banjo-Kazooie 3. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.